Good morning, everybody. Oh, sorry, good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's James Harper. I'm the chair for this meeting. Sitting and waiting eagerly to give his presentation is Niall Ashley.
It's me. Hello.
So, this session has been recorded. You'll be able to access that recording after the conference finishes, about a week or so later. There will be a little reel indicator on the agenda page for this particular cell of the session. Any questions you have, could you put them in the chat, and we will go through them at the end of the session. Please, can you give your feedback for this session? There's 3 different ways to do it. You can either go to the agenda page and click on the agenda cell. It'll pop up a window, and at the bottom of that window is a link to the feedback, or from your BYOA agenda cell, you can click on a link there to take you to feedback, or at the end of this presentation there'll be a QR code which you can scan in and take it again to the feedback page. If you don't know your conference registration number, use one of the first 2 and it will remember who you are. A copy of this presentation will be available from the website. Again, that's a little icon in the agenda cell, which is a little man pointing at a blackboard. And it will be available to download later. So, without further ado, this is session 3P.
Yep.
And it's bridging the gap between auditing and RACF security. And I'll hand over to you, Niall, and have fun.
Thank you very much, James. So hi, everyone. This session is obviously, as you can kind of see on my face and hopefully in the picture, I'm relatively young. I'm still relatively new to mainframes, but I've supported now 3 different audits between clients and different auditing companies. Basically, this session is designed to sort of bridge the gap. So maybe things that auditors could learn from security people, such as myself, things that maybe I assumed that auditors would know, and that kind of curse of knowledge. Well, I expect they should know this, and they expect I expect they should know this, and they expect I should know something else. Maybe they say privileged account, and I should know what that is, except I think of it in a different way because I'm used to mainframes, and the word privilege has different connotations. So yeah, this session is bridging the gap between auditing and RACF security. It's relatively low level because I'm still quite new to this industry, but hopefully it will kind of educate and kind of explain why this is important, and maybe kind of what we can do to kind of make this issue kind of resolved, basically, or mitigated. So the first thing that we want to talk about here is this idea of security through obscurity. So this is the idea that this kind of principle that suggests that systems can be protected simply by keeping their implementation details secret, simply by keeping the kind of general information about said system sort of away out of the eyesight, out of the periphery of the general public, and potential threats as a result. Now, it's based on the idea that the attackers will find it harder to exploit a system if they don't know how it works with its vulnerabilities. People probably have thought the same about mainframes. They're a relatively obscure thing in the sort of mainstream. Not the general public aren't as aware about mainframes. Therefore, it's going to be more secure. That isn't quite how that works. We have seen cases of kind of mainframes being hacked in the past. So, while it's seemingly logical, this approach is widely criticised as unreliable, and it's, very dangerous, actually. It's a dangerous mentality to have. Security through obscurity is basically the idea that if you hide the front door, someone can't break in. Well, actually, it doesn't make your locks any more secure, does it? It doesn't make your windows reinforced. Ultimately, it's just as easy to break into the house when you find that door. It's all well and good saying, well, I've hidden the front door. If you've left the door open, then when it's found, ultimately, it's clean pickings, basically. And likewise, I want to bring this to auditing, because with auditing, organizations may try to obscure the areas of non-compliance in order to appear, shipshape, in order to appear squeaky clean. Just because you try to hide the kind of non-compliance, hide, your failings or your kind of areas of, maybe that you've let yourselves down, that doesn't mean you are doing a good job. Maybe you even get signed off as appearing compliant, by an auditor, but if you later get hacked or this information comes to light, you're going to look really, really bad. And yes, say this is obscurity, this word that we use, obscurity. It's effectively a live omission. You're not necessarily saying we are secure, you're saying it looks like we're secure, and we're not going to kind of illuminate that further. We're not going to allude any further to this point. So say the live omission basically implies a system is in good condition simply by hiding the faults. Now, as I say, we've kind of brought that idea of security through obscurity to kind of auditing, the obscurity of hiding your kind of non-compliance. And actually, KPMG have done numerous kind of statistical analysis over the years about data analytics and all sorts. Data analytics, or DNA, is what this particular kind of graphic on screen is about. I do have a link to this if anyone's interested, sort of where I've got this from. It was actually from the Wall Street Journal, and it's, as I say, it says at the bottom, it's from 2016. And I'm just going to zoom in on one particular aspect of this. Making decisions or targeting consumers based upon inaccurate predictions will quickly erode, if not extinguish, customer trust. And then it goes on saying it will, shake the confidence of executives who rely on these predictions. But this is a really important point, okay? 70% of the people who were queried by this survey in 2016 believe that inaccurate predictions will erode or extinguish trust. Granted, it says to customers, but that's a general kind of ethos, right? If someone makes inaccurate predictions to you about the weather, if they make inaccurate predictions about the horse racing, or I don't know which football team's going to win, you are less likely to trust them next time. The more often they're right, the more likely you are to trust them. The more often they're wrong, the less likely you are. Sort of human nature, really. So as we touched on a minute ago, organizations may try to hide their failings in order to appear compliant, but that's basically, as a result, they're basically lying, they're hiding through obscurity their kind of failings. And therefore, there's inaccurate predictions about kind of how compliant the system is, about how secure the system is, and that erodes trust. That erodes trust for the general public, and that erodes trusts for, the auditors, that erodes trust for everyone. So again, it's all about transparency and kind of accountability. You cannot improve if you're kind of hiding why you failed. And this idea that if people assume your system is good, if they think, well, it looks good, and you've not told us it's not good, and you've had this live omission, this kind of obscurity, basically you have this idea of when you assume, and as the old saying goes, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So inaccurate predictions can be hugely detrimental. Okay, you are basically going to kind of make a sorry image of yourself as a result of this. So the best thing a company can do, as I've just said, is be honest, be transparent, and that's to auditors, to their security team, to people who are assessing their system. Ultimately, someone who's good at security, Mark Wilson, Leanne, etc., any of these, Sue Parsons, Rui Theo, any of these people who know their stuff, they are going to find out very quickly if you're lying and how secure your system really is. So don't try to kind of convince them with pretty words or with obscurity. Just be honest, be transparent. The same to auditors, be transparent, and then you'll get the most value from the situation, because the more honest you are, the more feedback they can give you, and the more feedback they give you, the more you have to work off and work upon to make your system better. And the idea here is that you say, when you assume you make an ass out of you and me, and audits can be difficult. We don't want audits to be a pain in the ass, right? Excuse my French, but the idea is that audits can be quite time consuming. They can be quite quite a big hassle. They can require a lot of investment, a lot of time and resources and people and money and et cetera, manpower, people taking the time to do their research, take these records, sift through them, etc. And they don't have to be that way. Unfortunately, in my case, they have been. So the case study that I want to bring forward today is actually my experience, or Vitali's experience, supporting an insurance company with their audit. And as long as I don't slip up, the intention is to keep the auditor and the client both anonymous, anonymized out of courtesy to them both. So please shout out in the chat if I do name them, and then we can basically delete this recording from the internet so I don't get in trouble. But the case study of today, as I say, is going to be about this unnamed insurance company with their audit from an unnamed auditing kind of organization. But basically, the summary is, well, Yeah, not good. It was not a fun time for, I think, any of the parties involved. There was us, there was the client, there was another third party, and then there was the another kind of client, I guess, and then there was the kind of auditing group. So there's about 4 kind of parties, and within that you had multiple departments that were involved. And this audit I kind of bring up took place over 5 months. It was quite an arduous process, quite a long process in the grand scheme of things. It did take a while, and there was a lot of work that went in. And I've actually kind of got a few of the statistics that I researched. I did look back through this audit to make sure I had the kind of correct statistics. But basically, we found that there was email exchanges between all of the parties involved, all of the different departments from each of the companies involved, and that totaled at 2 email chains, 135 pages of content. So we had those 2 email chains to keep track of, two different ones with different people saying different things. Copied and pasted all that content into Microsoft Word, 135 pages of content. That 135 pages of content had totaled at 19,240 words, and that was across both email chains, over 19,000 words. Again, in terms of the way that was formatted, that was actually 1,230 paragraphs, and they say there's 19,000 words accumulated in 1,200 over 1,200 paragraphs, and over 136,000 characters. So to put all those kind of numbers on screen at once, there, 2 email chains, 135 pages of content, 19,000 words, 1,230 paragraphs, and 136,000 characters. It was, as I say, suffice to say, it was an arduous process for all of the involved parties. There was so many kind of emails. Sometimes you even have almost sub chains, and then people would say, no, let's keep this all to one chain. We don't want 2 people replying and it branching off, into different kind of timelines. We just want a nice pruned email chain. It was hard work though, and as I say, we had all these characters, all these words, all these paragraphs, and I had to obviously read them all. My colleagues had to read them all. If any of us went away, someone else would have to take over. They would have to read them all. The client we were working with had multiple different people who were involved. There was multiple different people from the auditors. So it was a lot of work. I guess the reason I bring this up is effectively so we can ask, how can we streamline this process? Yeah, how can we streamline this kind of experience from all those words and numbers and paragraphs and God knows what else? How can we streamline that and bring that cumulative email exchange down to something more reasonable, something more simple, succinct, etc. And that is to say, how can each party make each other's life a lot less painful? It's not just the auditors making our life difficult or us making the auditors' life difficult. Sometimes there's that assumed knowledge, that curse of knowledge, and you just think, well, they should know that, but they don't. And that's fair enough. You don't know the equivalent information. So how can we do this kind of in a better way? And ultimately, the answer to that comes down to an exchange of knowledge across both parties. It is just about the knowledge. And as I say, assumed knowledge, the curse of knowledge, it's just about this idea that I would hope that the auditor would know this. They would hope that I know the equivalent. And neither of us have actually necessarily had the time or have taken the time to sit down and to discuss this. Thank you, James. Sorry about that, folks. Just went to take some water. And nice little pause, though. Right, let's resume. So yeah, coming back to this idea of this kind of this knowledge sharing, it is about the exchange across both parties. It needs to be a mutually beneficial kind of agreement. Auditing the security and the resilience of a mainframe system will require that we have an understanding of said mainframe security, right? You know, the auditor must understand what it is that they are assessing. And in the same, you know, you know, basically what they're looking at, in the same way that it would be for me to do a security assessment. So I quickly want to touch on just something simple for any auditors who may watch this, which is basically, you know, obviously I work in mainframe security and I work predominantly with RACF. Okay, well, what is RACF? What am I actually going to be, when you talk to me about an audit, what you say, Niall, look, I need this information for this audit, for this client, auditing this client system. You're the RACF guy. I don't know what that means, but can you help me? Well, let's extend that olive branch. Let's actually ensure that, you know, the auditor knows these things. So RACF is pronounced, say RACF is pronounced RACF, and it stands for Resource Access Control Facility. And it is a software, a type of software known as an external security manager, sometimes referred to as an enterprise security manager, but ultimately those are interchangeable. It's just an ESM, that's how people kind of, you know, refer to it in short. Now, RACF is one of the 3 ESM options that is available for the IBM Z or IBM Z mainframe systems. The other 2 are ACF2 and Top Secret or Top Secret Security is TSS. And they provide security management services for ZOS. So they basically help you secure your system. So to say, I know this may seem obvious for those who work in this field, but we have to be mindful that not many people from outside our industry and not many people who do, say, systems programming or KICS programming or any number of other things, they might not know what RACF is. So I apologize if this is possibly insulting to certain people's kind of intelligence, but I'm just going to make sure we're all on a level playing field here. So what can RACF provide? What can it do for you? Well, IBM provide this handy little document, this little infographic. And ultimately, it does all these things. You get the identification and verification of a user. So you've got IDs and then password authentication. That could be an OID card. It could be any number of, you know, passcode, passphrase, etc. You've got the ability to create profiles and protect different resources, and, you know, classifying those resources into different types of kind of categories or classes, etc. And that's something that we will touch on more on a following slide. And then you can do all sorts of other things. You can maintain and control access to resources via, you know, for example, role-based access control. You can implement that. You can collate kind of your, you can get your violation reporting, and then that will appear in the system log, say in SDSF, or you can actually take data logs using SMF records to kind of showcase and evidence the access of certain resources, protected or kind of non-protected, and that's all recorded. As I say, the audit trail capabilities utilize SMF, so that's something we will also touch on shortly. So those are the kind of general things that RACF is good for, but how does it function? Well, the bottom line is basically in your mainframe you'll have a database for RACF and an extensive set of programs that can manage or query it. And when I say you've got a database, technically that actually includes both a primary database or possibly more than one primary database, and optional online backup databases, which obviously are there for redundancy and you know, safety and etc. And the database contains records that are called profiles. Now, the profiles are the kind of crucial bit with RACF. RACF basically all of the functions really revolve around these profiles. So that's, as I say, touching on there, these profiles are just going to be hugely important, and they come in different forms. So let's say you've got this diagram here of a kind of the database, and you can see there you've got a few different types of profiles on there. Let's actually zoom into that. So we have, you know, kind of our RACF system settings or controls. So your set ROps kind of area, that's your sets RACF options. So that's where you've got a lot of your kind of general stuff, you know, your kind of high level, say password rules or whatever, everything that's kind of universal rather than on a kind of, you know, case by case basis. You've got quite self-explanatory, but when you define a user, they fall under the user, their profiles would fall into the user class. When you define a group, that would fall under the group class. And when you define a dataset profile, that would fall under the dataset classes. Again, they're quite self-explanatory. And those are three different types of classes. And as I say, the RACF database is segmented into classes. You can actually have up to 1,024 classes, and IBM supply approximately 250 by default. But when you get to general resource classes at the bottom, you can see that we've got a few examples. We've got Apple applications, so that's usually KICS. You've got facility, program, again, TKICS trans, so KICS transactions, X facilities, that's really useful for, really important for your kind of Z-Secure products. And then there's so many more like SDSF as well, etc. There's loads of different classes. And these have to be, you have to specify, when you define a new profile, you have to specify for the general resource kind of variety, you have to specify the class. It is not defined by default because it could be anything. You could literally say, I'm going to do example as my profile, but example could be from the Apple class, or the facility class, or the X facility class, or the SDSF class. And you would have to define that. And that's because, and actually you can have two that have two profiles that have the same kind of name, the same title, I guess, same string, as long as they're not pulled under the same class. Like you could have an example in the Apple class and an example profile in the X facility class. And that's because these resources, these profiles are pulled by their unique class rather than a unique name or ID. So again, let's come back to this profiles. We talked a lot about the word profiles. You're probably kind of bored of hearing that word now. So let's use an example that's quite kind of visual, quite kind of easy to understand. So let's say I'm a user and I'm a security worker, so I might fall under the team or the department of security. So I have a user/account profile, and that may be connected, and that's the relationship there in grey, the connected to the group. So for example, my user ID might be like, NAsh, so Niall Ashley shortened, and then I might have my group, which is say security, and so they say the relationship there is that I'm connected. But you have all these data sets, right? And you have all these general resources. So how do you kind of access those? Well, you don't connect to those, you are permitted to those, and that is a slight distinction. And the users or the groups can be permitted. So a user could actually be permitted via a group. So let's say my access doesn't come directly from my ID, my access actually comes through with the group, the security group. And that's how good role-based access control works, is you're only providing access based upon the roles that someone is performing or may perform. And then, as I say, these types of resources can be any number of sort of different profiles. A Unix priv is another general resource class, and you can see there that's one user connected to one group, and then that user and the group are both permitted to a dataset profile and a general resource profile. However, you could have one user connected to multiple groups, and you could have one user permitted to multiple different datasets but no general resource, or a group that's permitted to loads of general resources and only one dataset, or vice versa. It's all very interchangeable. So notable aspects of RACF profiles, when on many systems, permissions to a specific application. So Endeavour is a really kind of hot one at the moment for a lot of our clients. Permissions to specific clients will not be inherited by default, and they are controlled by RACF. So the only people who can use these resources will have to have been permitted via RACF, which is why the security team or the security kind of sub-function, maybe out of a systems programmer team, that is really important. So as I say, a security administration or engineering team will provide access as required. And that will be based upon, obviously, a kind of myriad of paperwork that has to be kind of validated. So you'd have potential change records. You have to valid authorization and approval. That might be kind of done via email. You'd obviously want it in writing, or it may be done through ITSM systems. So IT service management services, and ServiceNow is one example, but other examples could include Alloy Navigator, BMC Helix, Fresh Service, SysAid, Atlassian Jira, Topdesk, etc. The list goes on. But that's that kind of accountability that we talked about at the start. You need to be transparent. So who has approved this request? It has to be clear. An auditor will obviously potentially need to see this, need to query that. So it's really important that this information is in a position where it's kind of accessible to people who need to view that. Obviously on a kind of need-to-know basis only, obviously. So certain details will be required by auditors. So actually, this is quite an important topic. I actually know someone who worked for an auditing company. She's since left. She works for a different organization now. But she's basically said, you know, they have a standard, a sort of template that they use, and there's a table that I'm just about to show, which is used by various auditors, or it's at least very similar across different auditors, in order to learn about the different user IDs that are present on a mainframe system. And we'll focus on user IDs because that's what we focused on previously with that kind of relationship diagram, and it's the easiest way to explain all this. So, for example, it does say for generic accounts only, but you can ignore that for the time being. But basically, you'll have the request will be asking for certain information. It will say, right, you've got a user ID. So let's say Nash for me, Nash, Niall Ashley. Then you've got your name. Well, okay, that's my name is Niall Ashley. So you're going to assume that goes in the name field. But then you've got things like account type. Well, okay, well, what does that mean from a RACF perspective? Account ownership. Again, what does that mean from a RACF perspective? Because there is an owner field in RACF, but is that the one that they want? You've then got stuff like business justification. Well, is that the justification for why it was created, why it's currently in use? You know, what that's quite vague, right? What does that mean? Account type. So interactive or non-interactive is what they're asking for here, but don't forget on a mainframe in RACF, we don't use those phrases interactive or non-interactive. We might say, for example, is it a batch job ID, you know, a started task ID? Is it a protected? You know, that's another word we might use. An attribute is protected or restricted. Those are the sorts of words we would use, but that the auditors might not use. And that's the difference between the kind of RACF side and the auditor side. So we obviously have to make sure we have a really clear, healthy communication between password storage. If the ID is interactive and a user can access it, where is the password stored? And maybe that's not applicable. Maybe it's just my ID. I have my own password, right? Like I just either know it or I'm stupid enough to write it down on a post-it note and stick it on my laptop screen, which I don't. But you know, is that the answer you want? It's just in Niall's password for Niall's account is in Niall's head. But then maybe it's an interactive account. Maybe it's a really important account, so it's an emergency ID. Okay. What then? You know, is it if it's a break glass ID? You know, what then? So then you've got things like activities logged and reviewed. So you need to identify where the logs are stored, and then you've got the date when the account is vaulted and restricted. Again, if applicable. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say most, maybe in hindsight, I should have said some of the information that's required in that table will come from the base segment of a user or a group. And I think I've got an example on the next slide. So basically here we've got a super role and it's called super 2. And we've got, you know, this super 2 role is generic. It's not owned by one individual person. Okay. It is a generic account. As a result, it's as I say, anyone could log into this, assuming they have the password. Sorry, it's protected. So it's not it's a super role. It does things, but yeah. Then you've got the owner. So in RACF, we might have an owner, a RACF kind of base segment attribute, which says that the owner is you know, a person, a user ID, or it's a group or whatever. So in this case, let's say it's Mark Wilson, but it could be security. It could be, you know, they've got a default group there, a super group. Maybe the default group and the owner are the same. You know, there's all sorts of things that can occur, and that's the difference, right? Is when they're asking for account ownership, is it the owner that they want? Is it the default group? Is it the department who owns it? And that might be something you can only get through your ITSM. You know, you look on ServiceNow and you say, okay, I see this ID. It's a generic ID. It's a non-interactive or a protected ID. Who's sort of accountable for that? And then you have your ServiceNow name. So, you know, in ServiceNow, it might be called super role number 2, which is different from the name in the mainframe, which is super role 02. So again, slightly different. And then you have the owner in ServiceNow, the owner description in ServiceNow. So it might say that the owner has said this, or the kind of holder of this ID, the kind of person who has accountability for it, has said this ID provides elevated access and system special, or something to that effect. You then have, you know, let's say password storage. If it's interactive, where would you store that? So maybe that's in CyberArk. You know, CyberArk Vault is a PAM, or privileged access management system. So the users would have to log into that system. They'd have to submit a request for the password, and that request is then logged and it must be approved before the user is then given the password for the user ID and account. And the PAM tool should then automatically recycle the password after it's finished being used, and in order to ensure security. So for example, if I request access, I submit my request, it's logged, it gets approved, I get the password, I use the account, and then as soon as I stop using the account, or as soon as I'm kind of, you know, I'm at the end of my kind of need, I would it would basically the password would be recycled. And then, as I say, we talk about activities, where they logged, where they're reviewed. So Z-Secure Command Verifier, assuming that you own it, or the client that you work with owns this product, that can actually review all RACF commands made by the ID. And you can actually check SMF records and access monitor records that are collected, say, daily or weekly. And these will log actions based upon the user ID. They'll kind of batch them. Now, when is the account vaulted and restricted? In this case, it's an exception, right? Because it doesn't have a password. It doesn't need to be vaulted. So, there's no vault control for this. And it's marked as, say, privileged or as I say, restricted or protected in this case. So those are some of the details that you might be asked for, and kind of examples as to how they'd fit in. And here we've got our logs available for us to review to determine if users have access to a resource or have performed any activities. That's a request you get quite often from auditors. That's a request I've had every time I've worked with an auditor. Yes, the simple answer is SMF records are available, and they can be used to evidence what access or actions have occurred. And when you kind of run your kind of your relevant job to kind of collate these, it could look like this. So you've got obviously quite a lot here. I appreciate it's not necessarily the nicest way of reading it, but basically you'd have your processing of an SMF file. It would say in this case 119 million SMF records read, of which 5,674 have been selected. So it's not even 1% of those. And that's because you're looking at maybe a specific user ID. So again, of all the records, or maybe it's even a batch of user IDs, but it's still such a tiny sliver. It would then talk about where everything's come from. It would talk about the Kala using 41.41 CPU seconds, how much megabyte it required, etc. And then it would talk about all the different records and the output files. So that's kind of an example as to how it would look at the start. Obviously, I didn't want to go into too much detail because we've only got 45 minutes, and it is quite a kind of a dense topic to discuss. But that's, as I say, if you run your kind of Kala, you run your jobs to collect all the records, that's the sort of way it might appear. So we know that the user might want these SMF records. We know that they might say, like I need all these logs, and they might say, for example, in like we just touched on in the context of, please provide the system activity logs from October the 28th or the 20th of October to the current date, whatever that may be. February as the last example there, it's February 4th. So they've asked for 28th of October to the 4th of Feb, and they've said, please remember to capture the evidence with completeness and accuracy. That is a term you can hear quite a lot from auditors. It's a very good term because you want all the information to be full. You don't want to be missing anything, and you want it to be correct, accurate. There's certain words that we look at in auditing. So you've got, for example, currency. Is it up to date? Is it complete? Are we missing anything? Is it accurate? These sorts of things. So that, in terms of accuracy, you might actually use the word valid. Valid is there that validity? So they've said here, screenshots of the extraction process may be required, including the queries, parameters used, the system results, the record counts, and the date or time timestamps. That's fair enough. They want the information to evidence it. And so, the reality is, if you get asked this in an, this sort of request in an ideal system with adequate security measures in place, the logs will be checked, activity logs will be checked for compliance on a kind of daily basis, on maybe in kind of cheekier systems, maybe on a less regular basis, weekly. But they should be checked daily or ideally continually, just regular checks for compliancy. And the checks may be made, for any number of things. But in this case, what I've just said here is, yes, if you get this request from an auditor, or if an auditor is asking this to a RACF kind of, employee, a RACF, say, administrator, yeah, that's a doable request. That's very valid, to provide the system logs. It may take some time to collate this information. You may have to, say, write a custom job to collect it all, especially if you're looking at specific users in a specific time frame. And generally, the data will likely to be many thousands of lines long. So we touched on there that it was like, what was it, 119 million records, SMF records, and of that, only something like less than 6,000, like 5,700 or something like that, were kind of relevant. So when you get this request for this information, and they say we've got, like, I don't know, 6 user IDs, and we want all the information about everything they've done from 28th of October 2024 to the 4th of Feb 2025, you can get that. It might take a while, and it can be quite long. And it's therefore typically exported. It would therefore typically be exported into a .txt file type. And I've used their Microfocus, I think now owned by Rocket Software, but they made the extra extreme kind of .edp emulator type. And that option there is, you just go into tools and transfer file, or you can do reflection secure FTP, and you can just extract that into a TXT file. It's quite a simple process. That is fine for us as kind of RACF security people. We would say, look, we've given you all the information. It's a text file. Just fill your boots. Have fun with it. Unfortunately, there's this idea of acceptable formatting of data, and so the response we've had quite often is the logs provided cannot be used as evidence as they are in a .txt format, which is editable. Instead, please provide screenshots from your system. Now, I'm going to just give you a case study here as to why this isn't going to be possible. And as an auditor, I think there needs to be that level of, kind of wiggle room in terms of saying, like, look, we can't actually reasonably expect, say, Niall's team to provide this kind of unfathomable evidence in screenshot form. So the example I've got here is in a single system, we had 168 million SMF records that were read for a request for, I think it was, let's say, 6 user IDs between 2 given dates, everything that they'd done. And it's of that, it was something like 4,523 SMF records were selected. Now, if you multiply this by the IDs, because that was actually just on a kind of per ID basis, so there's 6. We actually had a final number of about 27,000, as I say there. So we had the first one was 4,523. Let's just roughly multiply this by 6. We've got 27,000. Now, mainframes can only display a certain number of lines on screen at any one time, especially because you'll have your command bar at the top, and then the bit which will say, like, say scroll, and it will be, say, page or cursor or whatever. You're going to lose like a little bit of space at the top or at the bottom. Generally speaking, on the client we were on at the time, it was 35 lines on screen at any one time. That's 775 screenshots required at minimum. So if we said there's 27,000 records that were, SMF records, and they were each 1 line long, each record was 1 line long, and you can only see 35 at a time, you're going to have to take 775 different screenshots. I mean, that's going to take you like a long time. That's going to be a very, very bulky, file or kind of folder with all these things together. You'd have to have a naming convention to sort through it. This is number 1, this is number 2, and then you go all the way down to number 775. And the reality is, I didn't think this was valid. The logs provided cannot be used as evidence as they're in text format, which is editable. Well, yeah, I can open MS Paint. I mean, screenshots are editable, right? All information, in a way, in theory, is editable. Even in a certain way, you could actually edit the kind of SMF data on your main. You could there's probably ways of people like hackers or kind of cyber threats or people who are just up to no good editing SMF data, or editing the kind of logs, and ultimately all records should be generated, and they said they should be accurate and they should be valid and kind of complete. And I understand that, but there's also a limit to what is reasonable from a certain team, and I think 775 screenshots is unreasonable to me. Now, SMF tamper-proof SMF can prevent SMF records from being edited or tampered with, but ultimately my logic was you could edit the text file, you could edit the screenshots, they're both as editable as each other. What I suggest is we show you the process, we export it, if I quickly go back, but we export it using this file transfer or reflection secure FTP. We actually do that on call. You can see us take all the information and we give it to you during the call, and that for a fact everything that Niall was screen sharing is correct and relevant, and he couldn't have edited it because I was watching his screen, or maybe if you're actually in the office, they could literally just watch over your shoulder. So that's one thing. But yeah, I think the screenshots thing here, like I'm happy to give the information, I'm happy to work with auditors, but I think you have every right to kind of stand your ground there and say, I'm not 100% sure about that. And actually, the main reason why I think it's quite important, which I touched on just with 2 extra lines here, is screenshots can't be searched, they can't be filtered, right? If you need to look for a very specific resource, a very specific profile, a very specific timestamp, you could just go Control F, and then you can just find it. That's so simple. You cannot do that screenshot. So if anything, it's actually in your interest as an auditor to accept a .txt format rather than screenshots. Now, the last thing I'm going to touch on from a RACF perspective is ensuring accountability. This is something really, really important. You may justifiably discourage the granting of access. You may say, I don't think this is right. This doesn't follow least privilege. This doesn't follow our role-based access control. Or, look, you have, say, recently we had a case where we had a client who had like 3 groups and they wanted to merge the access. So they wanted to basically merge those 3 groups just into 2. And I said, look, you've got one group here which has a lot of, it has thousands of profiles that it has permissions for, but it only has at most read access. And you've got this one, which has only a few hundred profiles that it has access to, but it has at the most, it's alter access, and it has alter on quite a lot of those, few hundred profiles. And I just said, if you merge them, you're just basically giving an unfathomable amount of access to an unfathomable amount of profiles. Either way, you're either giving the one group loads of access to things that it shouldn't have been able to read, or the other one, it will probably already have read access, but you're giving it alter access instead to a lot of those. I just said, I think we should keep this separate. I got shot down ultimately, and the approval was given, so I ultimately had to provide that request. I had to, grant that access. That did come back, and as I say, I was glad that I'd retained this information. I'm glad that I had that written information of me saying I don't think this is correct, and I'd done that. I'd had that sort of I tried to kind of stay resilient and say, look, I stand by myself here. And my manager stood by me, but again, it was all above board, like it'd been approved. We had to grant the access, and because I had that written evidence, when we had this kind of auditor looking at SMF records at one point, and we had actually an internal team from the client, even before that, they said, "What's going on here? Why have all these people got this access they shouldn't have?" And they weren't sure why the access was there. And I said, "Look, the justification has been lost in the SMF records, but I have the justification. You can see when it was granted and what was granted. I can tell you why, and I can prove it." So what I did was I basically had the Z-Secure, this client had the Z-Secure product suite. I utilized the command audit trail, and I compared the command audit trail data from the request on that date, and I basically said, right, in our mailbox and in ITSM service now, what can I find? So that evidence is crucial to explaining why permissions were granted. So as a security person, you want to cover yourself and basically save your own bacon by ensuring you're accountable. So I hope all this has been of use. I hope, from maybe some people who watch this who are auditors kind of learn a bit more about how RACF works and why RACF people do things the way they do. I hope RACF people can understand maybe more about what
people do things the way they do, why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do.
Mind repeat? James, I'm coming through. I've just muted James. Sorry, I was coming through his mic. You might understand why people do things the way they do. I think you've heard that probably about 5 or 6 times there. But ultimately that's kind of why I've done it this way. So the case study I've given, we want to narrow this down. We don't want to have 2 email threads, 2 email chains. We don't want to have 135 pages to read. We don't want to have 19,000 words, 1,200 paragraphs, and that's supposed to be 136,000 characters to read. You don't want that. Let's just keep it simple. Let's work together, and let's just make this a much better experience for all involved parties. So that's my session, kind of bridging the gap between RACF and auditors. And if you want to provide any feedback, there's a QR code to scan there, and you could submit that on the page there. It's conferences.gsc.org.uk/2025V. /feedback/3P, and I think it might be case sensitive, just to keep you aware of that. But that's my presentation. Thank you very much for watching.
Things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people do things the way they do, and why RACF people
I think we might have an audio issue. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, but I think the session's wrapped up. So please feel free to, as I say, submit feedback. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you all, maybe at one of the future events that I'm speaking for. So thank you very much, everyone.